the plot structure of 12 Angry Men and how it enhances the narrative. There are some films with a strong plot, narrative and script that you can't mess up. 12 Angry Men falls into this category. Plotted, written flawlessly, and performed in 96 minutes in one room. A plot is the linking of the events of a story/narrative together in a way that captivates the audience. It has a clear chronological order which is performed to provide the correct amount of tension or excitement to the viewers at certain times. This order shows when each juror makes up their mind and provides arguments all the way until the end, when they finally change from initially deciding guilty to not guilty. You learn about each character and the way they interact with each other. Plot is often used as an alternative word for story. Basically, what occurs in the narrative, the totality of the actions that the narrative tells. Aristotle stated, "The plot is the origin, as it were the soul of tragedy, and the characters are secondary." The plot encompassing the action is the driver of the narrative, and a good plot structure is essential for the enjoyment of any film. Many writers and theorists have expanded on what types of structures plots should take. Aristotle saw that plot manifestly ought, as in tragedy, to be constructed on dramatic principles. It should have for its subject a single action, whole and complete, with a beginning, middle and end. This structure has been the basis of most plot structures in one way or another, but there have been many changes as drama and plots have evolved. According to Wallace and Shepard, a particular shape of plot or arrangement of plots is arguably always meaningful in itself, and certainly contributes significantly to what this particular act of storytelling comes to mean to its audience. In the middle of the 19th century, German novelist and playwright Gustav Freytag confided a 5-stage play structure, Cutting 2016. This is the plot structure that the film 12 Angry Men revolves around. 1. Exposition. 2. Rising action. 3. Climax. 4. Falling action. And 5. Denouement. This movie begins with the exposition being when we first see the 12 jurors in the court. This sets the scene and we now know it's about a court case. After hearing the testimonies and arguments, 12 men leave for the jury room to make a decision. They spend almost the whole rest of the film in this room. The plot has these nameless, numbered men confined in a small hot room. This plot device sets the scene for the narrative. As the film is shot in one room, the cinematography has to be exact to capture the tension and the audience interest. The cameras are positioned above eye level to make the room appear more spacious. As the story progresses, the camera moves down to eye level, and by the end of the film, most jury members are shown in close-ups from lower angles. These variation of shot types are used at specific points in the timeline of this film to show the progression from start to finish of the plot and the narrative changing as the opinions of the 12 men change. When the jury casts its first vote, it is the beginning of the rising action, and we see the conflict that all the men believe that the boy is guilty, except one. This is when we listen to hear his arguments. Another important moment that I believe should be included in the rising action is when Juror 8 brings out the second knife. This causes a stir in the room, introducing a second possibility to what happened and leaving some of the jurors unsure as to whether the boy is actually guilty. They cast a vote. After this, one man changes his vote to side with not guilty. This plot device is the start of a rising action that leads to change in characters and indeed the audience's opinion. The pair of knives represent the two forms of reality that there are in the jury room. One where the boy is guilty and the other where he is innocent. Church and Jones 2020. Going back to the start of the film, we can see that the room is small, and with all 12 men, will probably get hot and stuffy after time. This film takes place in a sweaty, claustrophobic jury room and begins by showing the severe lack of air conditioning, describing how hot it is. Later on, after it has been proven that the old man couldn't have made it to the front door in time, the vote turns to 50-50. It then begins to rain, and we see one of the men get up to turn on a fan, which symbolizes how they are clearing the air and becoming clearer with their thoughts. The 12 men cooped up in a small room for such a long period of time, under stressful conditions, you would imagine them to be in need of some fresh air. Not only does turning on the fan symbolize the clearing of air, getting to the halfway point, it also shows how much thought the men are putting into this case, that they are sweating from stress, knowing that they are responsible for someone else's life. At the beginning, they all seem to just want to get out of the room, except for Juror 8, who made it his mission to convince everyone that the boy was innocent. The only reason people listened to him in the first place is him pointing out that it was a boy's life that they were deciding, and it was least worth a discussion before coming to a final decision. This shows the men have empathy, and although they want to go home early, They understood the severity and agreed to this discussion. The climax is when the third juror is the only one left fighting for his opinion, saying the boy is guilty. He kept referencing his son and mentioned a moment when his son was 9 years old and ran away from a fight. He said to him, "I'm gonna make a man out of you if I have to break you in two trying." When we find out his son ran away at 18, this shows he's been relating everything back to his son. He says it feels like his own son stabbed him in the chest. Juror 8 then reminds him that it isn't his son who's on trial. After this, Juror 3 becomes emotional, then changes his vote to not guilty. The climax is not just a high point of the action and the plot. It aids the narrative in the fact that it's a turning point in attitudes, self-realization occurs, and allows the story to progress, to change, and seek resolution if needed. After Juror 3 says not guilty, everything that happens between them and the men leaving the room is the following action. For example, when Juror 8 gives Juror 3 his coat, this is a sign of care and empathy. The tension is evaporated, and they are on a journey towards normality. We can see that the film finishes almost too quickly, given the amazing tension that has built up over the previous scenes. This is almost a relief for the audience, as it allows them to savour what's been happening in the narrative and indeed reflect. After the 12 men leave the room, the resolution takes place. Juror 9 approaches Juror 8, and they exchange names. This is significant as they are humanising each other as actual people and not just numbers, as was happening at the start of the narrative. They have now formed a bond because they believe each of them has contributed to the right by voting not guilty. This plot device allows the audience to tap into the message of the narrative, take individual responsibility, and be able to contextualise people and events in real human and compassionate terms. A message that is more relevant today than ever. The journey that the plot takes the audience through is a roller coaster of tension, emotion, attempts at rationality, and eventually resolution that enhances the whole narrative of the film. Finally, the audience is able to engage further into the film by also taking the points into consideration to decide for themselves whether they think the boy is guilty or not. They will leave not knowing any more information than the men in the room know, and might feel they relate to at least one of the characters, which would contribute to their experience of the narrative. The audience.